Golden Era. The Golden Era was the period that truly transformed WWE from a wrestling promotion into a mainstream entertainment powerhouse. This was the era where wrestling stopped feeling like a niche product and became something much bigger, with massive personalities, huge events, and a style that was designed to appeal far beyond hardcore wrestling fans. When people think of classic 1980s wrestling, this is usually the period they are imagining. The biggest reason this era became so important was because WWE learned how to present wrestling as spectacle. The characters were not meant to feel subtle or realistic, they were designed to be instantly memorable. Hulk Hogan was the ultimate superhero babyface, a larger-than-life figure who told kids to say their prayers, eat their vitamins, and believe in themselves. Andre the Giant felt like a living giant from another world. Randy Savage was intense, unpredictable, and endlessly charismatic. The Ultimate Warrior looked and acted like pure energy. Everything was bold, exaggerated, and easy to understand, which made it perfect for a mainstream audience. This was also the era where WrestleMania became the centerpiece of WWE's identity. Instead of just putting on wrestling cards, WWE started making its biggest shows feel like major cultural events. Celebrities became involved, presentation became more theatrical, and the company clearly wanted people to see WWE as more than just sport. It was entertainment in the fullest sense. That wider appeal helped WWE grow nationally and then internationally. For a beginner, the easiest way to understand the Golden Era is to think of it as WWE's superhero phase. The focus was not on realism or technical complexity, it was on iconic stars, giant moments, and clear good versus evil storytelling. This era built the foundation for everything that came after it because it gave WWE its first true global identity. Without the Golden Era, WWE probably never becomes the giant brand it is today. New Generation Era. After the explosive mainstream success of the Golden Era, WWE entered the New Generation Era, and this was very much a period of transition. The huge cartoon-like characters and over-the-top spectacle of the 1980s had started to run their course, and WWE needed to figure out what the next version of itself was going to look like. Instead of relying purely on giants, bodybuilders, and larger-than-life personalities, the company started shifting toward a younger and more athletic roster. This is where names like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels became so important. Bret Hart represented technical skill, credibility, and a more serious approach to wrestling. He felt like someone whose greatness came from his ability rather than just his size or presentation. Shawn Michaels, on the other hand, brought a completely different energy. He was charismatic, flashy, arrogant, and clearly represented the next evolution of what a wrestling superstar could look like. Together, they helped move WWE toward a style that felt more focused on the wrestlers themselves rather than just exaggerated gimmicks. That does not mean the era completely abandoned colorful characters, because WWE still had plenty of those, but the overall tone felt different. It was not as culturally massive as the Hulkamania years, and it was not as rebellious as what would come later, but it was an important bridge between two major worlds. The company was experimenting with a more athletic and modern presentation while still holding on to parts of its old identity. For some fans, this era is overshadowed because it sits between the huge success of the Golden Era and the explosion of the Attitude Era, but that makes people underrate how important it really was. The New Generation Era helped WWE slowly move away from the pure spectacle of the 1980s and toward a product where ring work, character development, and individual star quality mattered more. It may not have been WWE's loudest or most iconic period, but it quietly set the stage for the company's next reinvention. Attitude Era. The Attitude Era is the period most people think of when they think of WWE at its absolute peak in pop culture. This was when WWE became raw, louder, edgier, and far more rebellious than anything it had been before. The clean, cartoonish image of earlier years was gone. In its place came anti-heroes, chaos, controversy, and a style of television that felt unpredictable every single week. The biggest symbol of this era was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was not a traditional good guy in the way Hulk Hogan had been. He did not preach values or present himself as a role model. Instead, he represented defiance. He drank beer, swore, fought authority, and became famous for humiliating Vince McMahon, who had become one of the greatest villain figures in wrestling history. That conflict between Austin and McMahon was one of the key reasons the Attitude Era became so iconic, because it tapped into something universal. People loved seeing a rebellious anti-hero fight back against the boss. At the same time, The Rock was becoming one of the most charismatic performers wrestling had ever seen. His confidence, delivery, and star presence made him a perfect fit for an era built around huge personalities. Then you had The Undertaker, Triple H, Mick Foley, Kane, D-Generation X, and many others all adding their own flavor to a product that felt completely loaded with memorable characters and unforgettable moments. Another major reason this era was so intense was the Monday Night War with WCW. WWE was in a real fight for survival and relevance, and that competition forced the company to become sharper, bolder, and more entertaining. The result was a product that often felt messy and wild, but also electric. You never felt like anything was impossible. The crowds were louder, the stakes felt bigger, and the company had an urgency that gave the the entire era a different energy. For beginners, the Attitude Era is best understood as WWE's rebellion phase. This was the era where wrestling stopped trying to be a clean, family-friendly spectacle and instead became chaotic, edgy entertainment built around the biggest personalities imaginable. It was not always polished, and some parts of it have aged better than others, but in terms of energy, cultural impact, and pure memorability, it remains one of the most defining periods in WWE history. Ruthless Aggression Era. Once the Attitude Era came to an end, WWE had a major challenge in front of it. It could not rely forever on the same stars and the same style that had carried the company through its biggest boom period. That is where the Ruthless Aggression Era came in. This was the period where WWE had to reload and build a new generation of stars who could carry the company forward. It still had aggression, intensity, and attitude, but it felt more focused on proving who the future of WWE would be. The term Ruthless Aggression itself captured the tone of the era perfectly. WWE was not just looking for entertainers anymore. It wanted stars who felt hungry, ambitious, and determined to take their place. This was the era where John Cena, Batista, Randy Orton, and Brock Lesnar all rose into major roles. At the same time, you also had stars like Edge, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, and others helping create one of the deepest rosters WWE had seen in years. What makes this era stand out is that it often felt like a strong blend of star power and wrestling quality. Unlike the Attitude Era, which often focused heavily on shock value and wild television, the Ruthless Aggression Era gave more room for the actual wrestling to matter. The roster had variety, the storylines still felt important, and both Raw and SmackDown often had distinct identities. SmackDown in particular became known by many fans for having excellent in-ring talent and a deeper sense of wrestling quality. This was also a period where WWE was establishing its next icons. John Cena became the most obvious long-term face of the era, but he was far from the only key name. Brock Lesnar felt like a special attraction and a freak athlete. Randy Orton had that naturally gifted superstar feel. Batista brought power and presence. Edge evolved into a top-level main event talent. So even though this era came after WWE's biggest cultural peak, it did not feel empty. Instead, it felt like the company successfully created a new class of stars. For many fans, the Ruthless Aggression Era is one of WWE's most balanced periods. It had intensity, memorable rivalries, major stars, and strong in-ring action, while still feeling big and important. It may not have had the mainstream explosion of the Attitude Era, but it gave WWE some of the most important names of the next decade and proved the company could survive beyond its biggest boom years. PG Era. The PG Era marked a major shift in the way WWE presented itself to the world. After years of being defined by rebellion, aggression, and edgier content, the company moved in a much cleaner and more family-friendly direction. The product became more controlled, more polished, and more clearly designed for broad appeal. This was the era where WWE leaned hard into being a global entertainment brand that wanted to be sponsor-friendly, accessible to younger audiences, and consistent in its image. The face of this era was unquestionably John Cena. He had already become one of WWE's top stars during the Ruthless Aggression Era, but in the PG era, he became the company's central figure. Cena was everything WWE wanted in a lead star during that period. He was reliable, positive, hardworking, and easy to market. He could represent the company in media appearances, attract younger fans, and give WWE a clear identity during a time when the product was trying to appeal to as many people as possible. For some longtime fans, this era felt too safe compared to what came before. If you grew up on the Attitude Era or even Ruthless Aggression, the PG era could feel more scripted, less dangerous, and more sanitized. But that does not mean it was unimportant. In fact, it was extremely important because it helped WWE stabilize and strengthen itself as a modern corporate brand. The company was thinking bigger than weekly wrestling shows. It was thinking about partnerships, public image, global reach, and a product that could work across different markets and age groups. This era also helped define a generation of younger viewers who saw Cena as their version of the top WWE hero, just like older fans had once seen Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold in those roles. That is why the PG era can be divisive depending on when you started watching. To some it feels too polished, to others it feels nostalgic and comforting. Either way, it was a major phase in WWE history because it redefined the company as a cleaner, more accessible form of sports entertainment. Reality Era. The Reality Era felt different because WWE was now operating in a world where fans were more informed than ever. The internet had completely changed how wrestling was watched and discussed. Audiences no longer just followed the on-screen storylines. They also knew about backstage rumors, booking decisions, fan reactions, contract issues, and the real-life politics behind what was happening. Because of that, WWE could no longer present its fictional world in the exact same way it once had. The audience was too aware, too connected, and too vocal. That is why this era is called the Reality Era. WWE increasingly blurred the line between storyline and reality, sometimes on purpose and sometimes because it had no choice. Fans did not just react to what they saw on screen, they reacted to whether they felt WWE was pushing the right stars, listening to the crowd, or ignoring what people clearly wanted. The rise of Daniel Bryan is one of the clearest examples of this. His popularity became so overwhelming that it forced WWE to adapt, and his journey became one of the best examples of real fan support shaping the direction of the product. This era also had major contributions from CM Punk's influence leading into it. as well as the rise of The Shield and the growth of stars like Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns. The conversations around wrestling started to feel different. People were no longer just debating storylines, they were debating booking philosophy, missed opportunities, and the tension between WWE's creative plans and the audience's actual reactions. For a beginner, the simplest way to understand the reality era is that wrestling fans had become part of the show in a new way. WWE could still script outcomes, but it could not fully control the conversation around them anymore. The audience had more power than before, and real-life sentiment could not be ignored so easily. That gave the era a very distinctive feeling. It was more self-aware, more reactive, and often more openly influenced by the reality behind the curtain. New era. The new era was WWE's attempt to reset itself for a more modern audience. By this point, the company needed to move beyond the old formulas that had defined earlier periods and embrace a new generation of stars, a new style of presentation, and a product better suited to the digital age. This was no longer just about Monday night television. WWE was now living in a world of streaming, constant social media discussion, on-demand content, and fans consuming highlights and storylines across multiple platforms. This era saw Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Bayley, AJ Styles, and others become central to the company's identity. One of the biggest shifts during this period was the rise in importance of the women's division. Women were no longer treated as a side attraction in the way they often had been in earlier years. Instead, the division became one of WWE's key strengths, and stars like Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair helped make women's wrestling feel like a major part of the company's overall story. On the men's side, Roman Reigns gradually became the defining force of the era. While his journey to that role was not always straightforward, he eventually evolved into the tribal chief, and that transformation changed everything. Instead of being presented simply as the obvious top guy, he became a far more layered and compelling dominant champion. Once that happened, it became much easier to see him as the era's most important male star. The new era also felt like WWE trying to modernize how it looked and sounded. The company was producing content non-stop, reacting faster to trends, and increasingly positioning itself as a digital-first entertainment brand rather than just a weekly wrestling show. That meant the audience experience changed too. Fans were no longer just tuning in once a week. They were following clips, reactions, promos, and segments across the internet every day. For beginners, the new era is best understood as WWE's effort to modernize itself and build around a newer generation of stars. It did not have the singular cultural identity of something like the Attitude Era, but it was still hugely important because it redefined the company for the streaming and social media age. And within that era, Roman Reigns emerged as the clearest symbol of top-level dominance. Renaissance Era. The current period of WWE is often described as either the modern era or the Renaissance Era, and that second label makes a lot of sense because it feels like WWE has gone through a genuine revival. After years where many fans felt the product could be inconsistent, overly scripted, or lacking momentum, WWE has entered a phase where the company feels energized again. The storytelling is stronger, the biggest angles feel more meaningful, and there is a renewed sense that the product matters. A major reason for that feeling is the success of long-form storytelling, especially through Roman Reigns and the Bloodline. That story gave WWE one of its most important modern epics and reminded fans how powerful wrestling can be when a storyline is allowed to build over time instead of being rushed. Roman's dominance gave the era a central force, but it also created the perfect stage for another major figure to rise. That is where Cody Rhodes became so important. Cody's return, his emotional connection with fans, and his pursuit of finishing his story helped symbolize what this current WWE feels like. It feels more emotionally driven, more confident, and more willing to let major moments breathe. Instead of relying entirely on nostalgia or endless surprises, the product now feels more focused on making fans care deeply about the journey of its top stars. Another reason the Renaissance label works is because WWE feels culturally hot again. There is more buzz around major storylines, premium live events feel important, and the product has regained a level of trust with viewers that had faded at times in previous years. Fans now often watch with the feeling that the payoff might actually be worth it, and that belief changes the entire experience of following wrestling. For a beginner or casual viewer, this current era is probably one of the easiest modern entry points because it feels polished, story-driven, and accessible while still carrying the sense that major events matter. It combines some of the spectacle of older WWE, some of the athleticism of later eras, and a stronger emphasis on emotional storytelling. That balance is why many fans see it as a true revival rather than just another chapter.